All right, so now I'm at a crossroads here. I've been thinking about a couple different things I could do. We got the brain script set up. There's a lot of brain scripting features that aren't in there yet. So that's uh, part of the future to-do list. But there's a lot of other stuff that left behind by the stuff I cranked through over the last few days. Just to give a quick overview of some of the ideas I had and where I kind of think I need to be going next. Uh, let's go over some of these ideas real quick. The first one that came to mind, looking through my notes here, that felt like it was ready to be worked on is the entity system. So I have these. I think they're looking over here in the context. Yeah. So I have these entities, and they have 5 pointers to form a tree and a number of children and then there's some fields on them. uh, I want to be able to index these children quickly, actually, so this isn't a case where a linked list is appropriate. I kind of somehow need to get to the point where I can do um, pull up a scratch here. I kind of need to be able to do something like, given a sim entity, take me straight to the um, array of sim entities, right? And these might actually be like entity IDs, but we'll just call them sim entities in this part of the sketch. So maybe these are pointers to sim entities. But this also needs to be something I can mutate over time. I at least want to be able to use the increment, decrement, and I need to be able to add children to parties and stuff. Now, in the case, I guess, even in the case of the party, I want to be able to do this. So this is something I want to be able to do on tiles and on parties. In the case of the tile, though, the reason I do it is so that I can scan all of them to apply effects and stuff like that. And so there's a further level of optimization that could be done uh, regarding like when I do a sim entity and then I have a specific event structure and I want to get back the array of sim entities, right? But this could also then be like a list. It doesn't need to be an array anymore. Right, so that's a separate thing. But in addition to that, I probably want the ability to hand out IDs for these so they can be freed and reused, and a plan for how to free them without bugs when you're freeing an entity in the middle of a game frame, and then like you're also happen to be iterating over all the entities at the same time. Games constantly want to be modifying a list right at the spot where you are currently iterating it, so you have to have a plan for that. Um, so that's one of the things I thought about working on. Another thing I thought about working on was the scripting situation. So the game scripts, which I can show you what they look like right here, they're just little C functions attached to bits of data that do some small behaviors. Uh, the the deal is they have these functions they want to call, like this character, this tile ID, um, this tile, etc. It's all these things, and I have a spot over here where I have the so-called script operators, and I think this is where I need to make progress. So the entities are important too, but it feels like right now would be a good time to figure out how I want to sort out all these operators. There's a couple of different things that impinge upon them to make this complicated. One, there are a couple different styles of scripts, right? There's the tile script, which describes basically the game rules of a particular tile, which get attached into the game to make things happen. And then there's the brain scripts, and each brain script can be written from a couple different perspectives. So these are brain scripts written from the perspective of a particular tile on a particular character, right? So when we say something like this character, we're grabbing the character that has it's deciding what to do on its turn. And so that's the character that's acting, but there's also a tile attached to this script because it's a tile brain script. It's the brain script for how to use this particular tile. Now, I also know I'm going to want character brain scripts, which, look something like this. And then might be fairly complex. Analyze, turn, score, populate potential moves, score moves, move, or whatever, right? You can imagine having more complex types of AI patterns for some of the characters and bots you want to put into the game. And so I could go off and build that part. Like I said, we don't have the full brain scripting problem up. I could work on the brain scripts first, like building out more types of brain scripts. The third type of brain script, since I didn't finish that thought entirely, is the party brain script. So an example of this might be, you have a thieves party and you want to say, choose move combo, and then dispatch move combo, case 1, the magician uses stun and the robber uses pickpocket or whatever. And then you got case 2, whatever, right? You can imagine some different ways you might want to script up a party brain. Another kind of party brain I thought about having at one point is like a bat. So obviously a bat isn't a party, but you could have a party brain that says, I'm going to apply to any party that contains a bat, and I will control the behavior of all the bats in the party, right? So there's a couple different ways of doing that. Terrius Python, hey, the refactor is going all right. There's a big giant list of things to do here, and I'm sorting through what to work on next. I think what I want to do is I have this to-do list here, or this to-do here to deal with this mess. I think that's where I'm heading, but I don't know. There's a couple of these spots here where I haven't quite figured out how to make progress yet. We're going to try to just settle in here and see what's going on. What I was explaining is I've at least 4 different, like, slightly different contexts in which I want to write these little mini script things. They're actually written in C code, but I call them scripts because they're just little tiny functions that do some behavior in the either in the simulation or in the AIs. Seven Artist asks, does it actually help you to work in short bursts like that? Like what? Like what? You mean like I did an hour earlier today and then stopped and then I came back and I'm doing another session now? Um, I wouldn't say that it helps. I would say that there is sort of a quality fall off. If I work for 6 hours straight, or like if I have a half hour break for lunch, but I work a 6 hour day programming, I will tend to get a couple of sort of wins of good, like high quality thinking time. But I'll also end up spending sometimes an hour or two just rat holing on total nonsense for a couple hours straight. And I'm convinced that if you sit in your chair and work for straight 8 hours, and you do that every day, like all the time, that you're probably actually spending most of the time doing nothing without realizing it. And I could be wrong. That might just be a thing that happens to me. But I find that, yeah, whether I sit and work or not, if I touch the keyboard a couple hours a day, I make all the meaningful progress. Now, where it does start to suck is like if you have just a giant amount of rote work to do. If you have a giant amount of rote work to do, then it can be very useful to be able to say, like, I'm going to buckle down for the next two straight hours. I'm going to be uninterrupted. And even, like, I don't know, even then, it's like 2 hours at a time is kind of the limit. So I think of it as more like I'm gonna have a couple of opportunities to have an inspired, useful idea per day, and I'm gonna go and eat and go for walks or read a book or something in between one and the next because yeah, it seems like they take a certain amount of pacing anyways, so I might as well uh, not be stuck on the desk all day. But then again, like I'm definitely not the fastest person at getting stuff done. There is sort of a productivity fall off here. I miss the opportunity to make progress on more rote stuff that needs to get done sometimes. But this is also a fun project. Later in the year, I'll probably sit down and put a lot more serious effort into my object file project, which I did last year too. And when I do that, I'll need to figure out how to be a little bit more serious about productivity. But yeah, but I don't. I guess the reason I'm saying so much about it is just because I want to clarify that I don't think that it necessarily helps. It's just that it doesn't matter. You're not more. I'm not that much more productive by sitting there all day. Yeah, and it's definitely true what BYP is saying. Like sometimes you start working and nothing interrupts you, and the ideas are flowing for 5 straight hours. So then you would do it. That's just um, it's just a matter of uh, I think the way I tend to think about it though is yeah, I don't put a bunch of pressure on optimizing the productivity of getting lots of code writing done as much as I just try to remain available for where the best insights are because most programming problems are about catching the next right insight more than they're about getting tons of typing done. 7 artists, how long have you been programming in whatever language you use most often? Like, how familiar are you with the language and how many, like, how many projects have you managed in your the language you're familiar in or familiar with? 4 years. Yeah, so I don't think that that's necessarily that surprising. I think figuring out what to hold into your head and how to hold it is a long term learning too. I can imagine myself after programming for 4 years, I was probably very much still uh, preferring to sit and do it for long, long periods of time, just because. it was like I'd get into a good role and want to get as much out of that one role as I could. Now I have a lot more confidence that I'll be able to pick up things that I put down yesterday relatively quickly. Also, talking to BYP here, uh, how much you're saying you put effort into keeping your code base in your head and then think about them when you're away from the keyboard. How often do you actually feel like you make direct progress literally on the code in your head? Like obviously there's literal typing that needs to get done, but for me, I wouldn't quite describe it as keeping the code base in my head. Maybe I keep a list of like I have this concept exists and it is defined through a function in this way and through a type in this way. So I know what basic functions and types and algorithms I'm trying to organize. And I can, with a little bit more effort, think of like where specifically things are organized in terms of files. But I couldn't like start remembering names or think about things in terms of code. And I usually only have breakthroughs away from the keyboard that are sort of lateral. Like I will realize that I've spent 2 days on the same thing getting stuck, and that there's actually two other frontiers I could make progress on, and why don't I just go and pursue one of those? And then if I'm on a walk and I start realizing that I have a flood of ideas when I just think about switching to a different frontier of the project, that I go like, okay, let's chase that down and see if that helps. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So these ones are pretty easy. These are tile script headers. So these are just things that we run kind of to attach like, well, basically to construct the rest of the data about the tile. Tiles have a function body, but they also have some static data associated with them, and this is how we're combining those into one definition. That's interesting, Terriers Python. I literally think in terms of pictures, although I don't know, when I'm doing programming thinking, it's definitely geometric at least. Like I have a very geometry oriented sense of things. Like I imagine the data flowing through uh, fixed textures of information transforming, I don't know, pipes or sort of little streams or something. Like this picture forms in my head, and the information isn't a water. It's like a magical floating light fluid. But then imagine taking that basic concept of how you would picture things and then adding in just like as minimalist as possible, right? There's something somewhere in that space. My brain starts conjuring up images like that as I'm sorting out how things work. Like the geometry almost just stands for symbolic concepts just under the hood. Yeah. I can understand it because I feel like I experience it as geometric, but also as like a geometry of logic or a geometry of um, uh, information structure or something. And I kind of feel the geometry, I kind of see it, and I kind of see the symbolic notion behind it. At like to that that it's almost like the geometry is a symbolic notation for something else. Um, I mean, I think it is that, but I don't. It's not quite crystal clear. It's just a vague sort of sense that I wish I could like. I wish I could just improve the quality of my mind's eye just a little bit more so that I could actually catch one of these things and sketch it. Okay, now these are tile script events. Okay, now there's something here about like script context registers or something like that. And this contains things like this tile ID. Well, if I want to get really, I'm gonna get like more picky here. Those are not registers. This one is. Okay, ally and enemy are both registers right now. Okay. This character, I wrote out, okay, I don't want role ally, role enemy. I want something else. Where is... Yeah, Terrius, that's exactly right. There's a proto phase where the picture is too concrete. And so if I were to start drawing pictures and then I find that I can't figure out how to do anything with it, then I know that the picture is not complete and I toss that picture out. I go, this isn't it. It didn't work. and then I try not to draw for a while and toy with it a different way. But once in a while, you get to a point where you go to start drawing it, and instead of it getting in the way, something just distills out and is done. And then when you have that drawing, you can show it to anyone else, be like, here's how the thing works and what it does. And that, like, that drawing goes so much further to, like, ensuring I know what my final design is than just the code, right? Just having the code there leaves me feeling like I've got a thing working, but I'm not quite sure if I've ever had the whole thing in my head at once. And somehow the picture is like an attempt to take the whole thing and understand it as a single unified design. And if that can be achieved, it's a whole step above just having it working technically. Let's see. This character needs to go here. Did we have... Oh, I don't even have something for this ally. I don't know, it'd be like this party or something like that. And that's just to complete the pattern here. Context, yes, this ally. Ally party, return party. Okay, so that's something like that. Okay, we're gonna do this even though I'm separating it out because the enemy party is a little bit different. A little bit more of a incomplete part of the design because enemy party comes into existence during a combat encounter. So there isn't always an enemy party, but there might be other types of encounters where these still want to be valid. So this should be downstream of the combat encounter module, which we don't have yet. Okay, so there's the derived section. We'll build that out more interest and with a lot more over time. It'll be a lot more interesting than that. But yeah, this is already good enough. So I'm gonna say no, we won't proliferate built-ins like that. enemy party, sim entity, role child of the enemy party. All right, we're close to done here. Script, context, derived, brain script operators. And then there's tile script operators. Right, these are all just sitting right here, ready to go. Awesome. Now, these two actually don't belong here. Tile ink, da 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 da. Should be downstream of the combat encounter module. That's so interesting. I wish I could understand a little better what you're saying, BYP. You're saying the dot and cross product, the shape of the cross product. What do you mean by an add mul count? I think you keep talking about counting add and mul. I'm not sure if I know exactly what you're talking about. Are you talking about how many add and multiplication operators there are? Like, if I'm understanding correctly, we're talking about like the Cross product of two vectors. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. You're saying that you use a visualization of the shape of a cross product to correlate with the computational cost of that operation. So, like when you're looking at when you roll a d6, you don't sit and count the dice. You just go, I know that that's a 5. And you're it sounds like you're saying that you experience the shape of the operation visually to correlate the amount of arithmetic to do that operation. Is that right? That makes sense. That's cool. Hey, BYP, have I ever talked to you about the geometry compiler? Um, it seems like the kind of thing you might be interested in. It's not something I'm working on, but I am working on it, but I'm not the main person doing it. So I don't want to say too much. Kind of would like to let the person who's working on it build the idea, um, before I go in and uh, just give the idea away for everyone else to work on. However, it is kind of an open source project, so I think I'll just to give you the basic idea. If you know, like Euclidean construction programs, like um, Geometry Sketchpad, GeoGebra, the what's the name of that? It's not Black Magic. Science versus Magic.net. Is that the name of it? Magic versus Science.net. What is that website called? Magic versus Science. Geometry. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Have you guys ever seen this game? Desmos does kind of look like this too. Um, this game right here, Ancient Greek Geometry. It's called scienceversemagic.net/geo. Right? And if you start going, you can do stuff like, all right, we're going to make a triangle. And then boom, I scored this one. But oh, did I do it in 8 moves or less? 5? Yeah, I did it in the smallest number of moves, I think. Uh, so we could undo that. But how do I put it so that it's inside one of these initial circles? Well, maybe I could do a straight line from here to here. How would I get this? Ah, right. So I can extend that line out to that point. I can extend a line in a straight line. And now this should be a triangle placed inside a circle. So boom, yeah, you got this one. Okay, so this is Euclidean construction. It's a great game, by the way. I've done everything but the pentagon. I don't know how to do the pentagon. I have to. Okay, I should just someday. I need to go and cheat and learn how you do the pentagon. But everything else, if you with enough work, you can do it. It's a cool puzzle game. Takes a lot of time to figure out all the tricks, but um, these two basic building blocks are enough. You can add a lot more. So like, so you don't have to build everything from scratch. But these two are enough to make a ton of progress all on their own. Now, the idea of the geometry compiler is to take something that looks and works like this, letting you construct geometry, but it doesn't just start you off with two dots. So this game just starts you off with two dots, and there's nothing you can do. This is a game, so this is the interface. But you can imagine in something like a free-form version of this type of software, these points might be freely added. So you could have all manner of freely added points, or X coordinates, which look like Y lines, or like vertical lines, and Y coordinates, which look like horizontal lines, and circles and lines and whatever. Right? You can add in all the free variables you want that can just move around freely, and then you can construct stuff on top of those. And say you wanted something which, when given this point and this point, gave you that point geometrically, right? It finishes an equilateral triangle out of the 2 points you put in by returning a third point. Well, this is just a computation, and this whole process of Euclidean construction is just a visual way of describing how to construct the output from the input. So the idea is to take one of these construction programs and compile it and make a C function that you can link to. And the answers I have are no and no, but that's just because this isn't really my field. A fully realized, very powerful version of this, I think, should be possible, where you have free entities and constructions on top of them. And then whether those get rendered out as geometric algebra style computations and interfaces, or just straight up arithmetic, floats in and out, whatever. The part that we're playing with is just being able to compile that and link it into other programs, so that you can, for instance, build a C engine for a game and then do your geometry construction work visually and compile that and link it into everything else. Right? That's the big idea. But it seemed like the kind of thing, I don't know. It seemed like the kind of thing that you get into. I'd love to see a link to the project you're talking about. Okay, so hits, gather, begin, and release. This is a little bit off. This should also be downstream of the combat encounter module. Cool. I'm gonna have to check that out later. Thanks for the link. Something to check out. Okay, so that sorts this things out nicely. So the registers here are always present. If they're gonna need to be set, they're gonna need to be set, I guess. Like there's they just have to be filled in. These ones are just more stuff derived from that input information directly. These are things you can do during a tile script. These are things you can do during a brain script. Now I need to be clear about when these fill in. I think the answer is these should always fill in if there is a unique tile, a unique character, and a unique party to select into the script. Right? So, where do I have the... Just show me the operators. Run brain default. Party default. Looks at each character and runs the character brains. Run default character default. Whoever sets the ally party, actually. Yeah, that doesn't seem right. Um, so where this gets a little confusing is, I guess, at the level of game logic, which parties are selected matters, but which characters, all characters get a move here. So the reason that the game logic here selects the party registers but not the other registers is because this is the granularity at which the game is designed, right? Technically, I'm thinking about this like it's not like each character gets a turn, but rather each party gets an independent opportunity to select their moves, and each character in each party gets its own move, which can be selected in any order. But that's not the point. You're selecting what moves are going to happen, and then they all play out simultaneously. That's the structure I'm playing around with. So the game logic just selects the parties and then runs the brain. I mean, it'd be even better. What'll actually happen is that we'll only select the ally party. Once we have the combat system just a little bit more sophisticated, we'll eliminate these. enemy party registers and derive that from the ally party plus the state of the combat encounter itself. The reason I'm belaboring the point is because the character your brain is actually setting the script register. And I'm thinking that's a little weird because sometimes the game is going to want to pick a specific character and say this character is now selected in. And so when we go to run a brain for a party, why wouldn't we just say that that's the same thing as selecting that party into the context? Well, the main reason is because if we do it that way, then we lose the ability to figure out the enemy parties right now. That's it. So maybe we want to eliminate this enemy party mistake in the first place. Interesting. Okay. Okay, this isn't where I thought I was going to track things down, but I think what I want to do... What am I doing here? I think today I'm going to spend my time on my time for doing new stuff. We're going to actually go and build out a feature I never had before. Scripts, operators, context. Combat, age combat. Combat context. One combat context, party 1, party 2. We're going to get the brain to work without selecting the enemy party. Okay. So we just visit each party in the array and let them run the party brains. Hey, Seven Artists, I see your question about reading research, and I don't read research all the time. But I kind of like whenever I am digging into how to do a particular, how to solve a particular problem, I think it's always useful to go and read research. Like it, there's one kind of computer programming task that's just shuffling you know, pages around on systems. You can build an entire text editor without ever really getting into any fancy um, uh, you can get it build a full text editor like Forcoder without really getting into any fancy research. Um, that's not to say that you couldn't do better. Like, if you want to build a good diff, for instance, you might want to read some research. Um, but even that might not be research. That might just be a matter of finding a couple examples of a few canonical algorithms to get you started. The At some point though, and there's plenty of good work to do there. I'm not saying it's all trivial, but there's a certain point at which, like, if you actually want a computer to start doing something interesting, that I just like you gotta transition to having a skill beyond just shuffling pages around on the computer and actually knowing how to use it to solve some kind of problem, and that's stuff like geometric problems or recently the one I did was a problem of generating a random object in a fair way. Did you see my post set shuffle video? I don't know if we talked about it yet or not. If you go to Mr. Fourth Programming, shuffling a post set, this is an example of literally exactly what you're asking. How I dealt with running into the research to solve a problem when I couldn't, when I hit the limit of being able to solve it by myself, and I include in there some amount of explaining how I actually like. It's just the true story of how I handled it in that particular case. Um, so maybe that'll be helpful. Okay, so when we run the default party brain now, actually, we're only doing this for defaults, but we actually want this to work even if it's not a default. So I might need to go another layer farther here. So let me think. That's what happens if we run the default party brain, but what if we come in here, we look at the entity. Okay, so why don't we just do... wait, hold on, where are these defined? Tile character, perfect. I'm gonna make it worse now. But it would have worked perfectly if I had just stopped there. No such thing as an enemy party anymore. These are going to be RPG sim entity kind count. For now. That's just because that's going to make it easier to do. Well, why don't we do that minus RPG sim entity kind tile. This sort of thing gets me a little annoyed. All right, if entity kind, this is going to go here. If the entity kind is in the range, that's good. RPG sim entity kind. Last script reg. Then we'll do context TS this. We'll grab kind minus the first kind equals this entity. And then 0. Last script reg, first script reg. We're gonna have to do a 1 plus there because when you do last minus first, you miss one. Ugh, it's annoying. Okay, we're just gonna do RPG run brain context right on the tile. This is gonna take the logic of if this thing is actually one of the kinds of entities that we can attach a brain to, which happens to be the same set as the things we can attach, plug into the scripts, which is not that surprising, maybe. Then we grab the proto from the entity, and if the proto has a brain, we run that. Otherwise, we run the default. Now, tiles do nothing by default. They have to have a brain in order to have an effect. Characters and parties do these things. Now, this looks like a redundancy, like they're both doing the same thing. It won't always be like that. This is going to get more complicated, and this is going to get... This could also maybe get more complicated. I'm not sure. But this one will definitely get more complicated, as we're going to have the abilities of the character need to get sorted and chosen from more in a more sophisticated way than just whichever one is in the list first. Now the enemy party is a little different. It's going to start off by grabbing the ally party. And in order to figure out the enemy party, I'm going to need to be able to get an RPG combat context. Script operators. To get the combat context, I need to be able to go RPG. Well, I think it's going to be like cast that from something like RPG. What exactly do I want to call these? I've been calling them modules. Something like this, maybe? Yep, this is for coder. This is where it starts to get annoying, though. I'm not sure what I want to do about that. So if I call the use function, I could call that from any I could call this from any level of the brain hierarchy. So a party can call this, meaning neither the tile nor the character will actually be selected yet. So now it's like I want a restore function as well as everything else. Like I want to be able to take the registers that I've got, push a copy of them onto a stack, modify the ones I've got, and then pop them or something. So I might do another pass over these script register things to get that a little better. So I don't have to write, what is this, 6 lines of code now. Fairly complex, wordy, redundant code. Okay. Now combat context is coming back no good. Well, hold on. This can just be RPG this party context. That'll make things a little simpler. For now, what happens is maybe something like this is a good start. So then what happens is we set up a combat context. Okay. That should be good enough to get us started. Context module free. If the module is not 0, pop the stack. Otherwise, we push onto the context arena a new module. Either way, fill out the name, fill out the data. Push back. Context module first, context module last, module. DLL remove context module first, context module last, module. SLL stack push, context module free, module. When that happens, we'll scan the modules. And the first one that matches the one we're looking for, we grab its data and return it. That's not quite right. So this is the new thing, this module thing. I didn't do this on the last design, but it's starting to seem like a fairly clearly needed concept, because something I was having trouble with was I was stuck trying to figure out how I would ever build out the simulation for and the brains for behaviors or scenarios other than the combat scenario, right? So I had this RPG simulator. I could run a combat simulation, and I could run multiple of them back to back, but I couldn't quite see how I would fit in a flow of descriptions. Like, it was at one level you could do it. You just say, like, write some different code that does something different. But there were things about the brain scripting and the complexification and compounding of the complexity of the global variables, and I'm feeling like I'm now touching on something I didn't see before that is gonna help make those things more possible. So that's a good sign. But of course, it has to work instead of being broken. So maybe it is too soon to say that this is going in the right direction. We'll find out. Okay. Okay, so it is doing the combat simulation. I have to assume then that it's just failing to actually run the attacks at some point. Default brain, party brain, run brain. Kind is character, reg index 1. So now we have the party filled, the character is filled, the character has no brain. So we go to the tiles, we run the brain, we select a tile. Now what tile are we looking at here? Is this the heart? Yeah. So nothing happens. Unset that one. But then we go to the next tile. We set it again. This time we're looking at attack. It has a brain. Goes, how do we use it? Oh, but nothing happened. How do we use it? Proto ID is null. Oh. ID is null. Okay, well, let's look at that. Our tile does not equal 0. Yet the tile proto ID. This is. Oh, these are all wrong. Ugh, okay. I gotta be very careful with how I use this. That wasn't it. There, that wasn't everything. Ugh. I hate it so much. There we go. Cool. So, chasing that idea down a little farther, the hits are currently stored here and don't belong here. They belong in the combat context. Okay. So from now on, we'll get a combat context going by making an arena for it. And then we'll release it by just releasing the whole arena. These come straight from hits from the old versions, but instead of taking the context, they take a combat context. And instead of having TS in front of their names get shorter like this. And then hit. Combat context, RPG module context, RPG combat context, straight lit combat. Okay, getting there. Okay, so the TSs are gone, and then context arrows are out because combat contexts are in. Okay, let's see here. Combat context. This is going to get replaced with RPG combat context new, party 1, party 2. Then we save the module, and then down here when we end the module, we'll also combat context release the combat module. What I'm curious to hear what y'all will have in terms of opinions regarding Tree Sitter. I know the Fred editor has a lot of stuff I like, and one of the things they're doing is using Tree Sitter, and that's the one thing that I always wonder about too. But I'm curious because I don't know if there's any rational reason. I've never actually looked into it very carefully, what it is and how well it works. I get it. So tree sitters a parser generator that generates the stuff a text editor needs, like the indents and the highlights, and probably I would imagine the index of where definitions go. Like if you want to jump to definition, is it that kind of thing? There we go. All right, so everything's working again. And now I've got this combat module separated out. All the to-dos related to separating that out are gone. So I can take the base game and extend it with a mini game like combat. And now if I want to have another mini game called a shop, where I'll have a character or a party of characters that are not your enemy, but rather that are selling things to you. And the minigame can be different. It can devolve into a combat game if I want. Like, all that's still possible. And then I can have other encounters that don't involve party combat rules at all. Like, puzzle problems and stuff. So to speak. But let's see, is there anything left that I can imagine making immediate progress on today? Combat contexts are all good. Well, let me write down some to-dos for this new module system. I think I want... So one big problem is I want IDs for modules. I want module contexts. With arena allocation release pool acceleration. And I also want the scripts to be able to be sensitive to the presence of these. So for instance, attack here is going to say give me the enemy party. This is only possible if there is a combat context. I've written this in a way where it only relies on the regular context, but that wasn't because I think it needs to be that way. That was because I didn't have a separation before. Maybe what I actually want is combat context here and here. So now you have to get your hands on the combat context first. Yeah, let's apply that. That's actually... another nice step. So now we don't have to do this. Oh, but we still need context and combat context separately. Right, because in this case, that's not true. Because in this case, we're using a register that comes out of the original context. We're combining that with combat context stuff to figure out who the enemy party is. Here, we can just do combat context. So, whoops, let's make that combat context like that. Then the only issue is getting the combat context is a little bit gnarly. If we can make that not so gnarly, then we'd be done. We can always just wrap that like this. That seemed like the right sort of direction. But, final thought here. I also only want this to be... So when it comes time to generate a user interface for a player, I want the tile scripts to have enough information in them for us to detect whether or not they can do anything right now so that we know which ones are worth rendering into a list of things you can use. And so I want something like... if RPG... I don't know, event context, I'm not quite sure what, but like this or something. You know what I mean? So now, when you run this script, not with any events, but just scanning what events it has handlers for, it'll have to hit both of these for you to see it. That's fine, except that it's a little oh man, it sucks because like you want to be able to turn this whole thing, including the and, into a data structure of its own, in a sense. You want to be able to say what event does the attack tile participate in. It participates in the event of the tile getting used in the and when there's a combat context, right? That's the whole thing. And so that would imply that for every combination of that, there's a potential event, and we would want to be able to store all of those. So if we're scanning ahead to figure out, um, I mean, there's two different levels here, right? In any given context, I could use this much information to figure out that there is something here. The problem becomes, what if I wrote it the other way around? Let me just make explicit what's happening in my head. If I wrote this and I wanted to scan to see, hey, can I use this? It would have to go, yes, this thing here has a, if it is used, like used event right here. And so then it would say, yes, we can use this because it saw that, right? But it should actually only see that under this context, right? You can't actually use it, but logically speaking, this is still the same, except at the level of the short circuiting in C, right? If this went first, then if the context didn't include combat, if the context was combat free, then it would never see this used event right here. And so it would not think of this as usable. But if it sees this, then when I'm trying to scan it to see if this is usable, what happens is this function runs. It'll say, no, don't continue, because we don't want to run the code of the tile. We just want to see whether we're just checking if it uses this conditional or not, right? We're just checking if it uses this event. And so then it'll say 0, and it'll never see that it's contextual. So somehow I need to be able to get to the point where I can make a mapping that would say, like, okay, what do we know about the attack tile? And that tile should contain within it the information that it has an event handler for used with the context contains combat, right? So like this is the whole data structure. It's a used event, and it's got this restriction on it. Context contains combat. And I need to get that all into one if, so that, or into one, it's not even one if, into a data structure that I can pass to a single event context function. So I think the next big step is going to have to be to rewrite this to something like RPG event context. Maybe it'll be like this, although I think probably better. No, it would have to be like used combat, right? What if I make a little scripting language? So this is the used event with context combat, or let me just separate them. The event comes first, and then context requirements come after, and then combat context still has to be manually read. Combat module. Right. That's kind of dumb. It's hard to imagine. I mean, So there's a fantasy version of this, which is like this, I guess. Terry's Python asks, any reason why this isn't just like a bit set? Yes. So a couple of reasons. One, it's changing all the time. A part of the point is I want to be able to write more of these, and another part is well, I have the assumption that I want to be able to introduce one of these sort of context extensions for various different mini games, and I want to then associate that with getting back the mini game uh, sub context. Now, I don't actually expect there to be multiple of these simultaneously. I think it's just one at a time. So, like ideally, what I would prefer instead of scripting it is I would prefer for it to just end up being enums, right? Like somehow like this or whatever, right? Um, the problem with doing it as an enum, the main problem is that I have this assumption that I might want to be able to introduce these uh, dynamically, like via plugins, right? A part of the point here is to figure out how to is to make a couple breakthroughs on how we organize plugin architectures, and um, so I think ultimately I want to get down to the point where it's close to an ID, and that's why I'm not a huge fan of scripting it like this, because that makes it look like it would never be down to an ID. But what could happen here is if all of the modules and events are already declared, and then I do a one-time like initialization when we set up the system, each tile script gets run once without any of the events enabled, but with the tile header enabled. What I could do is, in addition to reading the tile header, I could look at all of the events and parse them once during setup. So then, if I'm having trouble coming up with um, and the idea being that then there's if say the number of events is never going to change, right? That's a fixed property. So it's like here there are two events in the script. So I'd have two slots, and each one would have the parsed the flag set or whatever prepared after that initial parse. Um, and so you wouldn't have to parse it each time you use it. You'd parse it once on setup. You'd set aside the flags, but where each flag goes would actually be dynamically constituted by putting together the plugins in the first place, right? I'm not necessarily thinking of hot reloading. Like once a game starts running, or once a simulation of this thing starts running, I'm not really thinking of plugging in more stuff. At least not while the game is running. There might be a mode of like save the game, modify, and the redo the thing that bakes the flags down and translate if necessary. But that's well, I can't quite tell what for what reason you're thinking about this, but I'm mostly thinking about this not for the issue. Like I'm not trying to figure out how to make it fast yet. Once I am trying to figure out how to make it fast, I'm not arguing against the bit set. That seems like the way to do it. Um, but the issue is that I can't do this from a meta program that runs ahead of time. I want to be able to um, sort of modify the simulation at runtime. So I want to be able to run a simulation and then unload and reload the plugin, with some new code in it, and put the simulation together again with some new sub game details plugged in from whichever module just got unloaded and reloaded. And so in order to do that, what I'm really thinking is I need ways to describe them. Like whatever I need to write right here is the question, right? So like the part where it gets hard is, yes, I'm making a plugin. So I don't think combat would actually be a plugin necessarily. It'd be a part of the base game, but it would still operate on the same principle, which is that you're not always in combat, and when you are in combat, it enables certain kinds of logic, like talking about the enemy party and hitting characters and stuff. So yeah. I guess I think we're probably not disagreeing yet. I just am not ready to implement it as a bit set yet because I don't have it yet the idea of where the definition for the set of modules comes from, and I don't know how to link. Right, it always comes down to a lot of this stuff. Always comes down to a linking problem. I need this line of code here to link to the combat subcontext module thing, right? Whatever ID that module gets, I need to be able to link from here to there. So what am I going to write here that can do the linking, right? If I write RPG event used, RPG submodule combat, subcontext combat, and these are global variables, could that do the trick? I don't know, because like this would link now, but now I don't have a flag, right? Um, Yeah, no, the set of subcontexts might be defined at runtime or might change between simulations. Um, so I'm carefully stitching together when I want that boiling down to happen. The linking part is always the trick here. Like it feels like something like this is what you want, except you wish, right, this can link to a global variable, right? I can set up over here and go over to my combat system and be like, hey, we're going to make an RPG atom, RPG subcontext combat. It's going to sit right there. And now anytime I want to uniquely refer to, and these will be like linked global var, like it's a linked global var, so it's unique across all the object files. And you know what? We'll make it a shared global var, so it'll even link across DLLs and everything, right? There'll be one of them, and anyone who knows that it exists will be able to link to it. Is this the right way to do it? I don't know. It gets really complicated trying to do it literally with the global variable linker. The hardest part is now the parameters here have to be mapped, right? So there has to exist a mapping somewhere that maps RPG atom pointers. So each atom would have its own address. And if we could map that to like a set of IDs, then a lot of this stuff would get easier, faster. But there's a separate issue, which is, okay, sometimes I want to subclassify these. So there are atoms, but then there are like subcontext atoms or something. And so then you want to be able to map that subgroup to a set of IDs that are unique to that group. And then if you had this, then finally the last step is like, okay, you pass in one of these, you map it to an ID, which maps to a flag, and now you've got a flag. But all that work is still runtime work, right? You're still not getting the benefit of mapping it down to a flag. So I don't know. I don't know yet. But this is one of the puzzles I still want to solve, is how I'm going to come up with names. Like right now I'm doing it with these strings. And that's why I was doing it with strings here too. Right now I'm just using runtime strings everywhere so that I can avoid the linking and pre-definition problems. All right, so this could look like this. I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to think about it next time. I think this is good for today. Boiling. I need to boil down event check conditionals to synthesize event and context correlation. When I said it was open source, what I mean is it's intended to be open source. It's an ongoing project that I've been participating in. But it doesn't exist in the wild yet. So I wanted to avoid saying too much about how we're doing it and what we're doing, because it's not even my baby really, but I think it's really cool. Okay, and with that, I'm going to wrap it up for today. Let me double check one thing. Yes, everything's working good. So I'm going to wrap it up for today. This was day 3. I got 4 more days. So I'm doing Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday of streaming on this. What we did today, we've basically got all the basic features back. There are a few variations of the brain script that I haven't built yet. And there are a bunch of tile types that I had in the old simulator built in that I don't have now. So a lot of the cool varieties and stuff are still missing. But all the main features are there. And so now I'm going to try to work on more stuff to wrangle and prevent the runaway complexity that caused me to need a rewrite in the first place. So I'll be working on more of that tomorrow. What that exactly will mean, I can't say. I might be working on the entity system. I might be working on this event problem we just ran into. I might be working on the brain system and building out the ones that are missing, and some of the stuff that I haven't touched before, like decisions. Maybe I'll try to build a series of encounters that aren't all combat encounters, and try to build a brain that can like go shopping or something. So if we set up like a traveling merchant encounter to go along with the combat encounters. One tricky thing about that is I don't have an inventory system yet, so maybe we should do that too. All kinds of stuff I might try to touch tomorrow. I'm not quite sure yet, but I'll definitely be here doing one of those kinds of things. So hope to see you here if you're interested and want to chat, and I'll see y'all around the internet. Bye.